The learning process roadmap. The learning process. 1. Conceptual and methodological framework. This learning process is an invitation to reflect collectively on a specific experience. It is a methodological process that allows us to, among other things, organise memories and information. The documented information, as well as that which is in the memories of those connected to the experience, is organised. But the learning process is not just about organising information. The learning process helps, above all, to guide reflections and analysis. It is not merely a descriptive process. The learning process demands a reflective and analytical relationship with the elements of the experience. For example, the relationship between what was planned and what was implemented, the practice and its relations with the context within which said practice occurs, what has worked well, what has failed, and why. One of the most important aspects of this approach is that the learning process allows us to gather lessons learnt. Lessons learnt are the result of individual or collective reflection. They refer to aspects that we have not identified during the experience or that we have perceived differently before reflecting upon them. In summary, the learning process allows for a group of actors to reflect upon a topic of interest. The learning process is guided by a series of questions, whose answers, resulting from collective reflections, will provide lessons learnt and recommendations that can be applied at a different level. There are several learning levels which can coexist in institutional life. The first level of institutional learning allows us to improve what we do. There is no fundamental reframing of any of the elements of the programme cycle. This level of learning explores how we do what we do. At the second level of institutional learning, we ask if we have defined the correct goals, if we are using the proper measures, if our work strategies are effective. The conclusions lead us to reformulate or reaffirm goals, objectives, values, assumptions, and strategies. The third learning level answers strategic, ethical, and political questions about the organisation's mission in a specific context. The conclusions lead to reconsidering and in many cases transforming institutional policy and context. This learning level impacts the whole programme cycle. It takes place, for example, when an organisation is designing or updating its strategic plan. A learning process exercise begins when a group of people pose questions about a concrete experience at any moment in its development. It starts with the organisation of memories and information and then focuses on analysis and reflection. In the end, several results must be produced, including lessons learnt, diverse reflections and recommendations. All of them must be incorporated into practice at one of the 3 learning levels. It is very important that the actors participating in a learning process agree to carry out the process based on 4 underlying principles. 1. The principle of inclusion, which means opening the reflection and analysis process to the participation of all relevant actors. It also implies considering perspectives such as gender, generational, ethnic, and cultural, whenever pertinent. 2. The principle of transparency, which means allowing the experience to be revealed to interested parties. Being willing to openly share memories, information, ideas, and reflections. 3. Complementarily, principle of honesty, which implies being willing to analyse, reflect, and learn from successes as well as from mistakes. The latter provide great value in individual and institutional learning processes. 4. Finally, the principle of confidentiality, which consists of only sharing the information agreed upon by the parties and under the conditions of discretion deemed appropriate. A learning process exercise is developed thanks to the collaborative work of a team. The team is a triad formed by the key actors, i.e., the group of people who are interested in going through the learning process. The focal points, who are designated by the key actors to provide the operational and logistical support required during the process. And the team who facilitates the learning process and is in charge of coordinating the design and implementation of the methodology and produces the report that compiles the lessons learnt, reflections and the recommendations. To implement the learning process, a 4-phase roadmap has been designed. Setup and framing, implementation of the methodology, preparation and discussion of the report, and finally, sharing and ownership of the results. In Phase 1, called Setup and Framing, the key stakeholders define the fundamental aspects of the learning process, the objectives and expected results, the guiding questions, the actors, the audiences, and the methodology. Phase 2 corresponds to the implementation of the methodology defined during setup and framing. In this phase, the facilitation team leads the application of tools that will help answer the guiding questions outlined by the learning process. In Phase 3, the facilitation team develops, shares, and validates with key actors. The report includes the answers to the guiding questions. Finally, in Phase 4, communications materials are produced to reach the internal and external audiences, prioritised during the setup and framing phase. The 4-phase roadmap of the learning process can be implemented in a linear or systemic manner. The linear roadmap is convenient under the following circumstances. When the group of actors decides to make a stop in the middle of their process and wants to gather recommendations and lessons learnt to apply them to the rest of their experience. At the end of a process to gather lessons learnt and recommendations that can be applied in the next phases or in the new process. And when a new process is being designed or planned and lessons learnt and recommendations from previous or similar experiences will be considered in this design or planning process. When we apply the roadmap to ongoing processes, the format is more systemic, not linear, because we will be going from one phase to the next for the duration of the learning process. In these cases, the learning process supports the implementation of the ongoing process. Under this systemic approach, new guiding questions are introduced as they emerge. Guiding questions are answered throughout the process. Reports are quickly prepared and handed over to the key players for their immediate application. In an ongoing manner throughout the rest of the implementation of the experience being analysed. We have now finished the overview of the conceptual and methodological framework of the learning process. In the next video, we will briefly go over the learning process and the tools used in the different phases.